Hello everyone. Thanks for watching. Hello Georgia. Hello Marcus. My name is JEROEN Beekmans. I'm a co-founder of Pop-Up City, in short PUC. We are an agency for urban transformation based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. We're working a lot with governments, local governments, but also nationwide governments, project developers, consumer brands on strategic challenges to improve space. And this can be a neighborhood, but this can also be a building. We've been doing so for the past 10 to 15 years. And we also running our own media platform, popupcity.net, in which we report interesting things, trends, ideas, and concepts we find in cities across the globe. Let's say something about the way we live and work and spend our time in cities of the future. This is short about me. I think we have a great lineup here. Georgia and Marcus. I think it's nice when you also introduce yourselves. Georgia, please take the stage.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And I'm Georgia Gould. I'm the leader of Camden Council, which is a borough in London, and I'm also chair of London Councils, which is an organisation that brings together the 33 London boroughs. So very focused, of course, on economic recovery. We've seen a huge impact of COVID on our communities in every way, a big increase in inequality, but also it's really hit our high streets. We are seeing some recovery. I think we're about 75% of where we were in pre-pandemic levels when it comes to central London, but it's a huge challenge for us thinking about the future of our high streets. And as we look to recovery, one of our big missions for London is to support and reinvigorate our high streets and make sure that there are places of economic thriving, but also bringing new social, health and cultural uses into our high streets. So looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Marcus?
Hi, so my name's Marcus WESTBURY. I'm the founder of Renew Newcastle and Renew Australia, which were organisations. One was initially a local organisation working in my hometown of Newcastle, Australia, started a little bit more than a decade ago with a strategy to re-energise what at that point was a failing industrial high street in a major city, which at the time had about 200 empty buildings in it, and used vacant space as a strategy to incubate new businesses, new opportunities, new creative enterprise. And the success of Renew Australia, Renew Newcastle, which launched something in the order of 250 to 300 projects in 80 vacant properties over a decade, in turn seeded Renew Australia, which is a national organisation that works with communities around Australia to activate vacant spaces for creative and community projects. And Renew Australia has been running for a little bit less than a decade now, and while that's not my current area of expertise, I thought I'd stepped away from doing vacant and empty space stuff, but I've suddenly found it's in very huge demand with the impacts of the pandemic across Australia, which has been pretty incredibly substantial in terms of impact on retail, major industries like tourism and education, which have long been real major industries in Australia, which have ground to a halt and really left Australian cities with really big questions about what their future is going to be.
Yeah, thank you. Well, based on the introductions of my fellow panelists, I think you already heard what the main topic of this session will be. It's about high streets, public spaces in cities, and how they have been impacted by COVID. If this anti-pandemic situation is only a temporary thing, or are we facing real challenges and real change in cities for the coming years in the future? I think it's a very interesting topic. We can look at it from all kinds of angles. So let's explore a bit. What fascinates me that as soon as this pandemic was there and everyone was in lockdown, I think we sort of at some point we all shared the same situation in the world almost. We were all in lockdown, and there were talks about people moving out of cities. The death of cities, and there was no reason anymore to be living and working in cities. I feel, to me personally, it feels that this has changed already again. I mean, here in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, every morning the roads are fully congested again, like there was no pandemic at all. How do you look at this, Marcus?
Well, I think it's interesting because I'm in Melbourne, which is actually still in lockdown. We've actually had the longest lockdown in the world. So it's very hard to actually see what these after effects are going to be because we haven't quite got to the after. But we did have a sort of 6-month hiatus of lockdowns where we thought we'd kept COVID out. And you can start to see some pretty very clear patterns, which is that there was increasing, people weren't rushing back to the office. Not that people were wanting to work from home 100% of the time, but equally, I think there's a permanent disruption to work patterns, and I think it's going to have long-term effects. I don't think it's going to be working from home forever, but it's going to have long-term effects. We've started to see there has been a mix. There's been an exodus from major cities to more regional centres, and that may be short-term. It may be longer term. But I think the other thing that started to become very apparent is that what people want from their home, what they want from their immediate neighbourhood, and where they're willing to travel for work has changed. Perceptions of that have changed quite dramatically. I think how that lands is going to have long-term impacts for retail patterns, distribution of business and industries, and all of the things that make a city a city.
Yeah. How is this for you, Georgia, in Camden? Have you seen any impact that's still visible?
Yeah, I think what we saw in London during the pandemic is we saw a big decrease in footfall in central London, and part of that was tourism. So I think our economy in London lost 10 billion as a result of the lack of tourism. But at the same time, we saw a real increase in footfall in local neighbourhoods. So some high streets actually thrived throughout the pandemic as people were working from home. And I think that we'll see some of those patterns continue. And there's a greater focus of policymakers on 15-minute cities, on ensuring that you can get everything you need from your local high street and local community, and that's definitely continuing. And I think it has expedited kind of patterns we were seeing already, with the move online, and as we're trying to encourage people to come back, and as I said, people are coming back. We're back to kind of 75%, which is a big increase from where we were. It's harder, it's fighting with a sofa. So it's a much bigger focus on experiences. So, what unique cultural and creative experiences are you giving people? And public realm, I think that there needs to be something to come back for. This question of not just coming back to sit in an office, but are there collaborative spaces? Are there places people can connect? And I think that linked to the work that you both are doing and that we're trying to encourage in Camden and in London is new and creative uses for empty spaces that allow collaboration, allow entrepreneurship, allow creativity.
Yeah. I guess you're both familiar with this third space concept, right? The space between, or the place between work and home, somewhere between. From my experience, I think this third places, whatever you want to call them, they have become much more important in cities in the pandemic, I believe. When you look at, indeed, I mean, a lot of companies were already shrinking their office spaces before the pandemic. I think this has only accelerated this trend. So in Amsterdam, for instance, many big companies, they really shrunk their office spaces in favor of people working in their own neighborhoods. So I think, from my experience, there is some kind of interesting perspective, potential in maybe developing these third spaces a bit more. Do you agree with me, or how do you see that?
So I mean, I tend to I've got more of a philosophy about it. So I'm not a city planner. My background is more from creative and event side of things that somehow rolled over into doing this space activation, largely out of an interest in what was my hometown. One of the things I really believe philosophically is that at times of great disruption, you don't actually know what's coming next. And I think it always helps to plan rather than try to assume that you know what the outcome is and then plan towards it. I think in general, I believe it's the right philosophy, particularly at times of great uncertainty. I really believe the plan is to seed experimentation. You know, I think if I thought I knew what the city needed, you know, I'd probably go and make a lot of money doing it. But I think the reality is that you've got a whole community at all different levels with pent-up ideas that have had a chance to view the city in a different way and experience it in a different way and are living that experience at the moment. I fully expect that is going to seed a lot of ideas of entrepreneurialism and creativity for people wanting to actually take some role in shaping the future of their cities. And so my philosophy is really to treat times of disruption, to treat vacancy, to treat empty space as a platform for those experiments. Find ways to seed experiments, to make them affordable, to make it cheap to fail, allow people to try things that might be, you know, might be counterintuitive even, and see what emerges from that. And that's the philosophy that I've tried to apply with the projects that I've been doing and the frameworks that I've been developing. So I always say, when anyone asks me to predict the future, you know, I'm very confident in saying I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Have your objectives been changing as a result of COVID, like in the work you do? Is there like a pre-COVID period in your work and a COVID or after COVID, post-COVID period in your work?
So for me personally, I have been working on different projects through this period. So I've only really come back around to this question of vacant space and empty space. I think the thing that I'm suddenly noticing with my, you know, having had this expertise, I think there was a period where, you know, cities seemed to, at least in Australia, at least, to be doing fairly well, and so there really wasn't a lot of demand. There was, you know, there was a sense that, you know, what the original Renew Newcastle program, because it folded because it kind of you know, it succeeded itself out of existence. You know, it went from working in a community that was a basket case to actually the city was viable and sustainable, and the problem it had originally set out to address had been significantly solved. What I'm finding at the moment is that there is demand from all sorts of places to suddenly look at this question of vacant space and what it means and what the future is. And I'm finding it not just in retail space, which is where I sort of, you know, started working on this stuff, but, you know, former office space, former manufacturing, you know, places like that where I don't think there was even a perception of a need prior to the pandemic. Suddenly there's an urgent sense of a need. And I think there's been a philosophical shift where I felt in the past where when you talk to government or you talk to policymakers, there was not a lot of intuitive, look, it varies massively, not a lot of intuitive support or intuitive interest in short-term tactical, highly responsive, quick win type strategies. And suddenly that's front and center of everyone's agenda, from national to state to local, all the way down, is these ideas of how do you make things happen immediately and affordably. And we're seeing, I've seen more urban experiments just we had a little 6 month window in Australia where things opened up before they shut back down again. I saw more experiments in that time than I'd seen in the decade and a half before that, because of this huge desire. But I don't think a lot of thought behind what that actually means, or how do you turn that into something other than a knee-jerk response. How do you turn it into a platform to actually iterate and develop more permanent and lasting ways that the city can change?
So to wrap this up a bit, you're actually saying that there is now a phase of experimentation. You know, apparently governments and all kinds of other institutions, they want to support this. You know, bring in new creativity to solve certain urban challenges. So there's maybe we should maybe try to give this also a place in a more permanent phase, or in a later phase in which everything is more or less back to normal, right?
Yeah, well, I also think of it as a process that iterates, not a series of pop-up things that come and go.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's funny, this morning I read in the newspaper, like Amsterdam, they closed up a few streets in the city for car traffic. So to also in the pandemic to give more space to pedestrians and cyclists. You know, also with the idea of social distancing in mind. And I guess maybe in London the same thing has happened, for instance, and Australia also. And the funny thing is that these closing off these streets was a long debated issue already before the pandemic, and this was always opposed by, for instance, the shopkeepers in the streets. They're like, no, you know, there's a lot of traffic or a lot of customers. They come by car, and this, you know, this is good for our business. And now suddenly the city had to close off the streets, and they don't want to go back to the previous situation. And there's even actually from the citizens, the people living in the neighborhood, there's been a huge demand for the city to keep it this way, keep the situation this way. I think that's super interesting, right? That's something that did not happen all the time, suddenly happened, and now it's becoming permanent situation. That's what I sort of like about this, what the pandemic has done to many cities. And, Georgia, you just referred to the 15-minute city concept. I think it's implemented quite successfully in Paris at the moment, right? It's an idea coming from Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris. It's just some kind of a vision that you can relate to when you look at the future high street in London. How would you, what interesting aspects would you implement from this?
Yeah, definitely. I think just quickly on the point about experimentation, because I think we definitely have seen that kind of rapid change during the pandemic. I think in two ways. One, as you say, kind of supporting more active travel. I think in Camden we doubled the number of segregated cycle lanes during the pandemic, and it's what we've been doing already, but the speed at which it moved forward, and that change will be permanent. But also I think that we kind of really changed our approach to outdoor dining, because it was a lot safer to allow outdoor dining. We kind of started what we called streeteries, which were these, you know, outdoor spaces that people could dine in and enjoy public space. And they've been wildly successful. And I think that will lead to a long-term change in licensing policy. So we have definitely, I think the pandemic has really changed the way we think about our public space and allowed things in that sense to happen that would not have happened otherwise. I think in terms of the 15-minute city concept, I think that you know, high streets for us, and you know, the more we kind of talk to citizens about it, they're actually much more about cohesion, well-being, a sense of place than they are about going to buy things. I think thinking really deeply about what people need in their neighbourhood is really important. And so one of the other things around the pandemic is around accessible healthcare. And actually, there's been, you know, pop-up spaces for vaccinations on high streets, testing, and making healthcare much more accessible for local communities. And I hope that will be another long-term impact of the pandemic, that we will think more carefully about how we bring health to our high streets and to local communities. And also, I think spaces for participation, and something actually we were doing pre-pandemic in Camden, is opening up community-led participative spaces. We call it Think and Do in Camden, around the climate crisis. And a huge amount has come out of that: clothes swapping, a library of things, projects around circular economy, giving away trees. But where citizens, I think, are looking for spaces they can be active and lead change in their community. And I think there's real opportunities to create spaces for citizen activism on every high street. Likewise, I think that, you know, if people are able to walk or cycle to get their basic needs, we will improve. We'll get closer to meeting our really bold climate objectives. I think that has definitely taken hold, and we're seeing those changes. But also we do have in London, you know, a centre where there is great cultural institutions that we do want people to travel into. So I think it's that we're trying to get that balance right between allowing local neighbourhoods to thrive, but also having spaces that people do want to visit, and great participative experiences and creative and cultural experiences in the centre of London, and doing both. And that's not always easy as a kind of policy objective, but we're trying to hold that balance, I think.
Yeah. Someone actually a while ago described it as a hub and spoke city. You know, like the city is sort of falling apart as a result of COVID, right? And it's falling apart into different urban centers, like at the neighborhood level. I think the 15-minute city concept really taps into this idea as well, right? Having everything for citizens within their own neighborhood, within a 15-minute radius. I think that also based on the work that I've been doing, for instance, for Enco, maybe you know Enco, this is a startup from London. They're offering hot desks, workspaces inside restaurants and hotel lobbies, and actually spaces that are being empty. They really believe in this concept. I think it's interesting that maybe like the future of work can offer an interesting perspective on the high street, right? On maybe reactivating high streets. In my sort of my dream world, maybe not dream world, but I think work offers an interesting perspective to activate the shops and shop windows and empty spaces on the high street. Do you think this is also applies to London as well? Do you think this is a viable perspective?
Definitely, and I think I mentioned the High Streets for All challenge that we as London have come together around, and some of the kind of exemplar projects are exactly that. You know, a space in Westminster which has become a collaborative space for the film industry, opening up you know, empty shops for entrepreneurial and other creative space, workshops as well. You know, bringing actually some of that kind of light industrial use back onto our high streets and creating and selling those products. So I absolutely think that will be one of the big kind of uses of the high street and bring people to it going forward. But I also think that there is a space still for kind of innovation clusters. So in Camden is King's Cross, which hosts the biggest biomedical research centre in Europe, and there's a huge need that we have for lab-enabled space. So we're kind of thinking about how do we, you know, what does require people to still need to come together in a kind of central place, and what does an innovation cluster look like, and how do we ensure that is linked and rooted in local communities, and that we're creating spaces for collaboration. Because I think that what would make somebody, you know, want to come into a place, I think it's about the people that they connect with and they meet, and that's not going to happen if we're just all sitting in separate offices. So I think we're thinking really differently about urban planning, both in enabling workshops and entrepreneurial uses in high streets, but where we do have still offices, how are we actually making those beautiful spaces that people want to come to and creating opportunity for collaboration and connection with communities?
Yeah. Marcus, do you have something to add to this from your own experience?
No, one of the things that I'm observing in Australia is, I think one of the effects of the lockdowns that we've had a 5-kilometre radius that we're allowed to travel for much of the last year in Melbourne. And I think what it really reveals is a lot of the inequities about the built form of the city as it is. You know, I live in Melbourne. Melbourne is sort of two overlapping cities, one of which is sort of the old public transport Melbourne, and then there's the car suburban sprawl Melbourne that sort of sits outside that. And so some people in their 5-kilometre radius have access to some of the, you know, most beautiful parks and places and places to exercise. It's a nice place to be. Others are just stuck in an endless suburban sprawl where it's, you know, it's deeply unpleasant place to be if you don't have somewhere to go, or the activities of life are not available to you. I think one of the things that starting to see as people come back out is that the working from home is allowing people to think of their work life as something that they have some agency in designing where and how it happens. So, you know, that's, you know, we're all got suddenly sort of crammed into spare rooms and, you know, spare bedrooms or cupboards or wherever we had to work from. But as people coming back out again, that idea that you have some choice about how you design your workspace as an extension of your life, and your employer is giving you some flexibility around that, or, you know, you're moving to a different way of work. I think it's going to really change people's ideas of the places. You give them more agency and more choice about the kinds of places where they work. In some cases, that will be turning hobbies that have, you know, projects that have emerged during lockdown into fully fledged businesses. In other cases, it's going to be taking the options that they've now been given, or the paths they can now see for how they can shape their work life, and turning it into something that has some choice about in their own community. And I think you're going to see places to work emerge that really start to reflect that choice and cater to that choice.
Yeah.
But even that has its own kind of inequity, right? Because there are some people who can choose how to work, but many people who have to, you know, go out and work, whether, you know, the people who through the pandemic were doing the caring or collecting the bins or those kind of vital things. So I think you will see this difference, you know, increasingly between those who have much more choice about where and how they work, and those who are, you know, very much, you know, more, you know, putting themselves well, during the pandemic, putting themselves at risk, but you know, their job, you know, it forces them to be out and about in a certain way.
Yeah. Look, and I think the other thing there is that it's often framed as choice, but you know, I think in reality, a lot of employers who see an opportunity to outsource costs back onto the individual worker, make them responsible for the workspace, take all that overhead and put it onto them. And I think you know, we have to be really careful about how I do think there is a positive element in that where people have some choice around it, but I'm also really conscious that you could easily just see a race to the bottom of poorly equipped, you know, third-rate workspaces that employers are partially subsidising at the expense of people's very limited choices.
Yeah. Actually, I see quite some perspective in having maybe more mixed-use spaces, hybrid spaces, like having the same space being able to host different functions over the course of a day. I think that'd be interesting, right? I think it also makes businesses maybe more resilient when you can host several functions within the same space. I think this can really build more resilience for the city of the future. Maybe also on high streets when a shop could be a yoga studio at the same time and a coffee bar at the same time and maybe a workspace at the same time or a restaurant. You know, mixing up all these functions. Do you agree with me? Do you think there is some kind of a perspective in making space more hybrid, and should maybe a government maybe be able to support this a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with that. And one of the pop-ups we're kind of where we do have empty space, trying to open it up to the community. And one of the spaces that we've opened up is as Camden Council, has ended up kind of governed by the community, a mixed space. So LSE, the university, have their students set up companies, so an entrepreneurial space, which is a workspace. The community are running a food cooperative underneath where people are able, it's kind of gone from a food bank to a food cooperative. There's a refugee kitchen, there's a community laundry, and there's actually a group who are helping pop up high streets. And what's really amazing about that different use of space is people are coming into contact with each other that never would have met before. So the LSE students are kind of working with Refugee Kitchen and some of the people who've come to the country as refugees to set up new businesses or to to support some of the food projects. And I think there's a question of inequality and people kind of often living parallel lives in cities. I think there's real opportunities to create spaces that bring that connection. I think if we think deeply about the kind of different kind of people that we bring together, and so I think that's quite exciting. We often kind of keep those two separate. So we'll have a voluntary and community organisation providing employment support and interview support over there. But then, the people who are in jobs and creating jobs are over here. And I think if we can create spaces that different groups come together, I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Building new communities at a very neighborhood level. Interesting. Yeah. We have to wrap up this session already. Just one last question for both of you. Cities have had a tough few years, and Marcus, I think Melbourne, Australia is still getting out of the pandemic. It's still in lockdown a bit, right? But
yes, for at least another week or two.
Yeah. So good luck with that. Can you help me find the silver lining? So what do we have to look forward to in cities?
Well, I do think that we had a COVID-free summer here in Australia, and I think the sensation of watching the entire community spill out onto the streets, and all the outdoor dining, all that communal activity, and I think a sense of longing for community, I thought was really powerful. And so I think at a time of great disruption like this, I think people do start to genuinely evaluate what's important and why. And I do think there's a lot of momentum to think critically and constructively and creatively about what cities can be, coming from very different people that might have been thinking about that before. And so I think that's never waste a crisis. I think it's a really good opportunity to build better cities, and I'm seeing some seeds of that popping up everywhere. And I think in the best world, I think we'll learn from this, and we will build better, more resilient communities out of it.
Georgia?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that there's huge challenges that have come out of COVID and exposed kind of deep inequalities, and as we said, massively disrupted. But I do think that if we do things right, that could enable a kind of a new kind of era of creativity and kind of flourishing. And the use of empty spaces and rethinking how we use our spaces, creating new green spaces, new kind of health and cultural experiences close to home. They're all things that I think are really powerful and can bring people together. And I hope that this leads to some real policy change. So kind of one of the frustrations we find, and I bet you both find it too in different ways, is just really encouraging landlords to actually enable some of this. And when shops just sit empty and you can't get hold of people, and I don't know if this exists in other parts of the world, but I would love for us as a council to have the power, if a shop has been empty or a space has been empty for a certain amount of time, then we can use that space or give that space to the community in some way. So I hope that this leads to a kind of change in power balance, in governance, and creates new long-term ideas about how we enable the kind of community creativity to flourish.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Marcus. Thanks a lot, Georgia. It was nice having this conversation with you. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon in another occasion, another place, maybe physically. Be nice someday. Thank you.